I have 8:46, and so let's get going. So we have maximum time with Sarah and one another, and with the divine spirit that's also among us and within us. I have a brief litany here, which comes from a book that was published by the United Church of Christ and sent to every ordained minister. I don't know, Sarah, did you happen to get this one? It was kind of at the beginning of the pandemic,
Yeah, I did get one.
and it was prayers and blessings for the pandemic. Some of them are whimsical. Some of them are serious. Some of them I can't really read in polite company. So,
Well, that'd be perfect.
right. So this one is from Donna Scopper, who's a pastor in New York City. How to find purpose in times like these, especially since we don't know the name of the times or what the old name for the old times really was, or what the new time for the new name for the new times will really be. What story will we tell ourselves during the pandemic? It's fine, I survived, I coped. Or, I called myself beloved, and the earth called my name back to me. Welcome everybody to this session, and I see we have some visitors and guests among us, so glad to welcome you to our circle of friendship, learning, love, and spiritual growth today. I'm going to turn this over to my friend and colleague, the Reverend Sarah Lohrbach, but first by saying that this is a continuation of many sessions we've had, past, present, and future, on spiritual journeys. And as we hear one person's spiritual journey, it makes us ask ourselves, what's my spiritual journey been like? How is it similar or different from the path of the presenter? So keep that in mind as we listen to and enjoy what Sarah has to offer us. Pastor Sarah?
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
We had this scheduled way back when the pandemic first began, and we're finally getting to reschedule, and it's great to be with you all this morning. I don't have any visuals that I'll be sharing today because I didn't have time to put any together in the midst of everything else, but it will be wonderful to just share my story with you, even just in spoken word. So I'll start where it all began. I was born and raised in the United Church of Christ. I grew up in Peatone, Illinois. Was baptized in the church as an infant. My mom, from the time I was born, really was working for the church, at least part-time. And by the time I was in first grade, she had moved from working partly in the schools to full-time in the church. So even though she didn't get ordained until a little bit later in my life, I was essentially a PK for my entire life. And so my mom was doing music and youth ministry. And so that became a huge part of my life, even at a young age. I started singing duets with my mom in church at age 4, mostly Sandy Patty. But even though I don't remember a lot of that, I do remember the fondness of just being in church and of seeing pictures and such of me and my mom up front in the church. And from that point on, I was singing in all of the church choirs, from cherub choir to our Good News Singers, which was our youth choir for 4th through 8th grade. And eventually I joined the adult choir and did a little of the handbell choir when I got older as well. And church was something that even when I was young, it was never something I did simply out of obligation because my parents forced me to go, but it was something I enjoyed doing. I had a second family. I had my church grandmas and grandpas and aunts and uncles that, became an important part of my life. And I also had a lot of my actual family that went to church with us. And so church was an important part of my life. I was there pretty much every Sunday. I got my perfect attendance pin every year growing up when we still did those things. And even in the summer when my mom was working for the church, my best friend Jenny and I, we would go play church at the church. And it's no surprise to find out that I was the one always in the role of the preacher. I should have seen this coming. But one of the most formative experiences, even though I was involved in, my local church doing Sunday school and youth group and all of that, one of the truly most formative experiences for me as a young person was church camp. Um, I started attending church camp the summer after first grade, where my mom happened to be one of the directors at the time. And the camp I went to, we first started going to Tower Hill Camp in Sawyer, Michigan, which is just about 12 miles up into Michigan on 94. But then we eventually moved to Pilgrim Park, which is out in Princeton, Illinois. And they're both camps that are owned by the Illinois Conference of the United Church of Christ. And the camp that I started attending when I was in first grade, I've been a part of my entire life since then. But when I was a kid, camp became that home away from home. It was the week I looked forward to and counted the days towards every year. And it was a place where I could truly be who I was and be myself and not be worried about being judged or made fun of, because when I was in school, I was always the kid who got judged and made fun of, whether it was my buck teeth or my glasses or how I dressed. I was oftentimes the kid who got made fun of for as long as I can remember it. But when I went to camp, camp became a safe space for me. It became a sanctuary for me where I didn't have to worry about the things I had to worry about when I was in school. And it was truly the week I looked forward to more than any. And so when I went to camp, I made friends, and I'm still connected to people that I became friends with through camp from childhood. And it's something that I've continued to do. I grew up through the ranks. I became a counselor in training when I was 16 and got to learn what it was like to be on the staff end of camp, and eventually became a counselor. And this summer, had it not been for COVID, would have been my 12th year as director for this camp. So it has truly been an important and influential part of my life, and truly a large part of why I ended up where I did. Um, and to give you a little sense of how important this camp truly was to me, when I was in high school, I had the opportunity to go to Europe one summer with school. And then I found out the dates would have meant I couldn't go to camp. And so my mom and dad and I had a discussion, and it didn't take much time for me to decide that I would rather go to camp than go to Europe. And there are truly no words that will ever describe to anyone who's never been to a camp like that what the experience is really like. But that gives you a little sense of how important that camp was to me, that I would choose a week-long church camp over a couple weeks in Europe. And I've since had one other young woman who's part of that camp make the same choice, who is now also in seminary. So that'll tell you a little bit about how much camp can influence one's life. But when I was at camp, it was where I learned for the first time what it truly meant to belong somewhere. But it was also where I discovered the importance of my faith, the importance of a place like camp where people can go and be themselves and know that they belong and know that they are loved. It's where I truly experienced the love of God in new and profound ways as a child. And I know for a fact that if it weren't for my years of camp growing up, that my path probably would have gone a very different direction. So camp was one of the ways I was involved in kind of the wider church movement as a young person, in addition to my involvement in the local church. But when I was 15 years old, I was asked to be a fill-in delegate for the Illinois Conference of the United Church of Christ for our biennial meeting called General Synod, which happened to be in Kansas City that year with the Disciples of Christ. And I said yes, and I got to go with the Illinois Conference to Kansas City, and I actually got to, as a 15-year-old, vote on things that mattered for the whole church. And I actually was the youngest delegate for the Illinois conference that year. And I got this opportunity to sing with a youth choir from youth all over the country, from both the UCC and Disciples of Christ. And it was kind of the first time in my life I realized how big the church really was, that it was so much bigger than just my local church or even the kids I knew from church camp, that I realized for the first time I was part of this really big thing that spanned the entire world. And being in that place, I kind of realized for the first time my love of church, not just going to church, not just church camp and things like that, but my love for the church and what the church does and what the church stands for. And in particular, the United Church of Christ, because at 15, we were in Kansas City and we had Fred Phelps and some of his followers show up to protest across the street of the convention hall. And I got to see how these people of faith responded, how young people my age, young Christians responded to that in loving and powerful ways. And it helped me to see for the first time that the church had a role in the world and doing something about things like, you know, Fred Phelps and promotion of hate and you know, anti-gay sentiments and all of those kinds of things. And that kind of created a wonderful grounding for me in the coming years, because not long after that was when I began my own coming out journey. And my coming out journey and my spiritual journey are inextricably linked to one another for a myriad of reasons. But I, my last 2 years of high school were when I was going through a period of personal discernment and figuring out who I was and trying to figure out how these two seemingly contradictory parts of my identity, being gay and being Christian, actually worked, and how I could hold those in what felt like great tension at the time. And even though, there were things in my life that did tell me that this was okay, and I had experienced things. I grew up in a very small, closed-minded town, and even in the midst of, just trying to find community online where I could, talk about these things, had people tell me that I was going to hell, and that that I was a sinner and that I needed to change if I ever wanted God to love me, pretty much. And so even though I had things in my life that told me this was okay, I also still had a number of things in my life that told me it wasn't. And I went through a pretty dark time my last couple years of high school while I struggled with all of this and tried to come to terms with my own identity. But luckily for me, my story didn't end there like it does for some people, because I had some really amazing things that happened that changed my life for the better during that really dark time in my life. And one of those was that my mom, when I was a freshman in high school, had was already in seminary at that point, but moved to a different church and began working at an open and affirming church in Naperville, Illinois. And so I went from being part of a church where I didn't know a single person who identified as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or anything, or never even heard it talked about, or at least not in any positive way, to a church where there was a whole array of different people from different walks of life that were there every Sunday. There were gay couples and lesbian couples and couples with no kids and couples who had kids. And I got to go every Sunday and be in this worshiping community with all different kinds of people who came to a place where their identity and who they were was embraced and celebrated. And so even though my mom was working at this place where I kind of knew that she accepted and fully loved and affirmed these people, there was still that, worry deep inside me that said, well, they're not her children. I'm her child. And what if it's different when it's her own child? And so I struggled even with wanting to come out to my parents. And eventually I did. And my parents never showed me anything but love and affirmation. And my parents got a double woozy when I came out to them, because I didn't just come out in terms of my sexuality, but I shared with them the other internal struggles that I was having at that time in my life as well. And their reaction to my coming out could have gone very differently and sent my life in a very different direction. But they never once made me feel like I wasn't loved, or that they didn't care for me, or that they didn't approve of who I was, but they sat with me and walked with me on my journey and supported me in whatever ways they could, including one of the other amazing things that happened. Months after I came out to my parents, my mom found out about the UCC Coalition for LGBT Concerns. And as a 17-year-old child, my mom said, would you like to go to this? And they have a national gathering every year. And on the UCC General Synod years, it happens right before that. And my mom and I were planning to go to Synod that year. And she asked if I wanted to go early and go to this event. And so my mom took me, dropped me off, and left me there to experience that for myself. And I cannot, in any amount of words, explain how pivotal that simple event was in my life. And once again, I was the youngest one there at age 17. But there was this whole array of people from across the country who identified as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or allies. And they also identified and lived open and honest lives as those people while also being Christian. And it was the first time I saw, like, in this wide expanse, people living lives as LGBTQ Christians, and there not being any sort of contention between those two parts of their identities, fully accepting both of those parts and being in a community where both of those parts were fully accepted and embraced. And it was really at that event where I finally, for the first time, truly started to believe that being gay and being Christian was okay, and that God loved me just as I was. And one of the big things that happened as part of this was the person who was serving as the youth and young adult coordinator for the coalition at the time, and his name was Tim Brown. And Tim was someone who just exudes love and all kinds of good things. And he could not have been a better person to be in that role, because, he worked with me and the other youth and young adults that were there that year and years, after that. But really, talking with us and creating a safe space for us to talk about our lives and our concerns and our joys and in our process of self-discovery and where we were, and just sat there with us in that and showed us the most extreme amount of love and affirmation that he could, wherever we were in our journeys. And after that first event, I actually continued to stay involved in the coalition. And it was through that first experience that I actually ended up getting the opportunity to serve as a young leader at multiple church events later in my youth and young adulthood. Um, Tim empowered me as a young person and gave me opportunities to attend different youth events and general synods as a leader with the coalition, where I got to help lead workshops and help lead that same kind of safe space that he had led for me as a young person for other young people in the same place that I had been. And just getting to having at such a young age, when I had been in such a place of struggling with my identity and figuring out who I was and whether or not who I was worthy of God's or anyone's love for that matter, this one event created a pivotal point in my life where that shifted from that identity struggle shifted from being a place in my life that caused nothing but, you know, doubt and distress, to a place that helped me be a leader and a beacon of hope for other young people. And having not had that experience so early in my coming out experience, I would have, I think, gone a very different direction. But this, the UCC Coalition, and especially Tim, helped me to see that my sexuality and my journey of self-discovery was not a deterrent to my faith, but could actually end up leading to the most amazing spiritual growth. And for the first time, I actually held those two parts of my identity not in tension, but closely knit together, and seeing that they weren't opposites as I had thought they were for so long, but they were actually interconnected parts of who God created me to be. And it was, you know, there really are no words to explain how formative that event was for me. And so, you know, the way my parents accepted me and loved me and embraced me, the coalition, being part of an open and affirming church, you know, those things were unbelievably important in my life as I began to come to terms with who I was. That doesn't mean it was all sunshine and rainbows, but it helped create a amazing foundation for me going forward as an out lesbian young person, an out lesbian Christian, at a very important time in my life. And about 10 years after I came out to my parents, I finally made the choice to come out to my maternal grandparents, whose theology and beliefs were vastly different than my family's. My grandparents are avid followers of Jimmy Swaggart, James Dobson, um, a lot of people who are very big anti-gay Christian preachers. And, my mom grew up part Pentecostal, part Nazarene, and my grandparents were still very much in that kind of Christianity. I can't remember which one they were in at the point, but I decided to finally come out to them because I'd seen them change their minds and their beliefs on some things when it came to someone they knew and loved. I'd seen them go from supporting the death penalty to not supporting the death penalty. I'd seen them go from having a lot of issues when it came to accepting people of other races to fully embracing my cousin's out of wedlock out of wedlock mixed child. And I'd seen them embrace him and love him fully. And I thought, maybe they'll change. Maybe I'll be the reason they change. And unfortunately for me, apparently this was the one issue on which loving someone who fell in that category did not only not change their beliefs, but seemed to further ground them in them. And at that point, my grandparents essentially disowned me as their grandchild. And they blamed my mom for allowing me to live that lifestyle under her roof. They told my mom she needed to repent, that she needed to leave the United Church of Christ, and they blamed the church for allowing my mom and I to go so off the path of where we needed to be. And eventually, sent the letter I sent to them back to me with a letter with words that are forever ingrained in my mind of, it's not God that has changed, but it's our sick society that has changed. Ending with, I'm sorry it has come to this in what had been such a loving family. As though my coming out was the thing that ripped apart the love that had been in our family. And I learned very strongly that my grandparents chose their faith over their granddaughter. And that experience, as hard as it was, and as hard as it still is, because I didn't speak to my grandma again for almost 2 years. And she died before we ever had a chance to reconcile our relationship. And so having my grandparents essentially decide that their faith was worth more than their granddaughter, or having a relationship with their granddaughter, was one of those things in my life that, as hard as it was for me, really solidified for me the fact that I needed to stay in the church, that I needed to be a part of the church, and I needed to show people that there were Christians who believed differently, that there was a different kind of church out there, that there were different kinds of Christians out there. And really solidified for me how important churches were in helping LGBTQ persons either affirm or not affirm their worth and identity. And that I knew that that I was being called to stay in the church and to be a part of making it so that LGBTQ people don't just feel like the church is okay with who they are, but actually celebrates who they are, and that God loves who they are, and wanting to be a part of creating that alternate story, like the devotion that Jeffrey read this morning. We have an opportunity as a church to write the story. And I wanted other LGBTQ young people and not so young people to know that there was a different story out there, that they didn't have to believe the one that had been fed to them for so long. And so I was in college. I went to Elmhurst College, which I'm going to kind of backtrack in my story a little bit, because I'm going to kind of shift gears from my coming out journey to other parts that my coming out journey is also linked into. But I had some, experiences in college that were both linked to all of the things that I've talked about so far. And, I'll kind of add on to that a little bit more. But it was, in the midst of my undergraduate experience, in addition to the leadership opportunities that I had been given through the coalition, which continued through my undergrad years at Elmhurst College, I also was in college, and truly through my college experience began to discover my gifts for leadership. And to the point where at one year I was serving on 5 different leadership boards at one time while going to classes, and somehow managed to pull it off. But it was, through all of those kind of leadership experiences, and through my, leadership experiences with the coalition, that I truly began to not just feel the call to do what I'm doing right now, but felt like I was actually being, led towards and equipped for ministry. Given the gifts of leadership, of working with different kinds of people, going different places, doing different kinds of leadership, working on teams of people. All of these things were very formative and helped me kind of develop the gifts for ministry, even before I knew this was where I was going to be called. And God was continually pulling me towards ministry in my undergrad years, even though I didn't quite answer right away. And I sometimes like to compare my story to Jonah in the Bible, where, I kind of went the opposite direction, even though I kind of knew where God wanted me to go. But as a PK, the last thing I saw myself doing was going into ministry and working at a church like my mom. I, was seeing something different for my life. But God's plans were far bigger than mine. And so the summer after my junior year of college, I had gone to the 50th anniversary of the UCC at their General Synod. And I was coming back, and, as an extrovert who also loves the church, I came back just riding on the emotional high from that event and all of the wonderful things, and being with my wider church family. And I was just asking the question because I was in this process of discernment of figuring out what I wanted to do. I was in this weird moment of being undecided in my junior year because I knew what I didn't want to do anymore, but I wasn't quite sure what I did want to do. And I said, man, I really hope that whatever I end up doing, I'll still get to do events like this. And that was when God kind of, said, yoo-hoo, over here, I have a solution for you. And really just contemplating that experience after the fact, realized, okay, maybe it's time to stop fighting this. And I changed my major and talked to my mom, and I said, I think I'm going to go to seminary. And so I ended up at that moment was kind of one of the most vivid moments of call that I can, recollect in my life, where I just knew that this was the path that I was supposed to be on. And, prior to that, I'd been involved in the church, not just in little ways, but in large ways for pretty much my entire life. But I failed to truly see how passionate I was about the work I'd been doing in the church until that moment. And I finally just had to face the facts that God was calling me and equipping me for ministry. And so I, made the decision. I changed my major. And then that very next year in school, two key events happened that really just further grounded my call. And the first was one of my good friends, who happened to be Muslim, was becoming the target of some anti-Muslim hate crimes on campus. And it was was a time of a lot of turmoil on our campus while all of this was going on. And seeing the things that were happening on a campus that I had thought was, open and affirming of all people from all walks of life, to see these things happening and to see how they were affecting my friend, really kind of reminded me not just of the importance of my faith and my work in ministry, but of the interfaith work that I've been doing during my undergrad years and working with, students on campus across different faith lines, and how important that work really was. And, I, along with several other students from several different student organizations, um, within a 12-hour period, planned and pulled off a campus sit-in on our college mall, where we had speakers, and we encouraged everybody to wear black, and we had t-shirts designed, and it was just this beautiful experience where I got to see how much people came together. I mean, we packed the campus mall, and we literally had less than 12 hours to plan it and invite people to show up. And to see how people came together, and to be a part of making that happen was, and just helped me really realize that where I had been called, and the choice that I had made in terms of what I wanted to do with my life were incredibly important, and that I needed to keep doing that work and to keep working with people across all lines of difference. And the other big event that happened was, I was living in the dorms, and, at this point in my life, I had gone from being slightly ashamed of my identity to having proud to be gay stickers posted all over my dorm room door. And at one point, I had the student across the hall slide a note under my door wanting to talk to me about my stickers. So of course my initial reaction is, oh, she's got a problem with it. She wants me to take them all down. And I was kind of agitated and angry about it. But eventually I, sat down with her to talk. And boy, was I wrong. her issue with my stickers was not that she had an issue with me or with anything with my stickers, but that walking out of her dorm room every day and seeing my stickers, she was confronted with her own struggle in her own identity. And after, a few different conversations with her, it became very clear that she was in a very dark place like I had been in my high school years. And one night, the conversation that she and I were having via text took a very dark turn. And she had told me that, prior that she was struggling, and that, a big part of her struggle was that she had this boyfriend that she loved and she didn't want to hurt him. And she had told me that her happy place was where she met him, which was at a train station. And this one night she started the conversation took a really dark turn, and she had compared herself to a woman in a LGBTQ film who ends up committing suicide. And I kind of sensed that this was not going to any kind of good place. And so I was with some of my friends who were supporting me through trying to figure out what I needed to do in this situation. And she had told me that, if, she would kill herself, she would do it in her happy place, which she had already confirmed to me was the train station, of which there was one 5 minutes walking distance from campus. And so I ended up calling a suicide hotline, and then ended up calling campus security. And not long after that, I got a call on my phone from campus security that they had done a safety and wellness check of her in her dorm room, and she was not there. And so, at that moment, my heart kind of sank, because I just had this gut feeling that I knew where she was. And, I went up to my room, because I was in my friend's dorm at that point. And the, campus security were there. They were on the radio with the city, Elmhurst City Police. And at one point, I heard a call come across their radio that said they had found a girl at the train station in downtown Elmhurst. And luckily, at the time they found her, she was just sitting there and had not yet done anything. But, that experience really solidified for me um, my call to ministry, but also specifically my call to um, work through my ministry and through the church to create a space for LGBTQ people, and to help them know that they are loved and they are worthy, and that God loves them, and that, uh, you know, there is, nothing in the world that should ever tell them that their life doesn't matter. Because that was uh, a very, a hard moment, after a really hard couple years already. And it just really affirmed for me that this was where I was supposed to be, and not just in ministry, but to work through the church to create a safe space and a sense of worth and belonging for LGBTQ persons. And so those are two of my most formative and impactful events when I was in college. And eventually, after 5 years and three major changes and three field education experiences, I did graduate with a Bachelor of Arts in Theological Studies and Christian Ministries, and headed off to seminary straight from my undergrad. And I was one of two people in my entering class who came straight from college, and I was only one of five under the age of 25. Uh, so it was, you know, even still in ministry, there's not a lot of young people that go right out of undergrad into ministry. And, there were a lot of second career ministers that, were part of my entering class, but it was hard being so young and already kind of struggling with feeling like I belonged there. And so my first year was pretty rough. I felt unqualified. I felt like I was in over my head. I was questioning whether or not I was actually cut out for ministry. And I seriously considered dropping out after my first year, so much to the point that I actually made a deal with God. And so I had applied for a fellowship grant in the total of $10,000. And so I said to God, okay, if I get this grant, I'll stay. I'll take that as a sign that this is where I'm supposed to be. But if I don't get it, I'm quitting. Well, I didn't get the fellowship, but that's when I learned that God has a really wonderful sense of humor, because within the next 2 weeks, I found out that I had been awarded not one, but two different scholarships, both in the sum of around $6,000. So I said, all right, God, got the message. And I stayed in seminary. And can't tell you it got much easier from that point, because I don't think seminary was designed to be easy. Jeffrey can speak to that. But I was more often than not, at least confident going forward from that point, that I was called to be there, that this was where I was supposed to be. And while I was there, I did 2 more field education experiences, one as a chaplain intern at a local hospital, and then I got to work with the UCC campus ministry down at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. And I got to work with a lot of different kinds of people. I learned a lot about providing pastoral care during those experiences, and got to see kind of a different side of ministry and being a pastor than I had prior. But one of the most transformative experiences for me during seminary was writing my constructive theology paper, which was the thing that we had to do at the end of our program. And, this paper was about 80 some pages in length by the time I finished. And I nearly faced defeat and gave up a couple times. I even had to withdraw from the class the first time I took it and retake it the next year. But in the midst of all of that, what I realized was that during those times of doubt and struggle and feeling just like I didn't have the answers and like I wasn't equipped, were actually the times that my faith and my theology grew the most. And one of the things that we had to do with our constructive paper was to write to and from a specific context, and I chose LGB youth. And through that process, I truly found my voice as a theologian, and was able to put my beliefs down on paper in a way that I was truly proud of. And I still sometimes look back and read portions of that just to remind myself of why I'm here and why I was called to do this work. So it nearly killed me a few times and almost made me drop out of seminary, but it ended up being one of the kind of most profound things that happened in my faith journey. Two of the biggest challenges, however, that I've had in my faith journey happened over the last few years. So, the summer of 2020 is defined by COVID, which has not been a great summer, but my 2 summers previously were also not great. In the spring and summer of 2018, I was going through another kind of hard time in life, dealing with a lot of personal things. And in the midst of that, I reconnected with an old friend, Martha, who I'd actually met through church camp when I was a teenager. But we'd kind of not stayed as connected over the years because she had moved several different times and was living in South Carolina at the time. And she was also going through a hard time in her life when we reconnected. And I think it was a godsend for both of us to reconnect at that particular time in our lives. And, I talked to her, every day. And she had become kind of one of my rocks during this time in my life when I needed one. And that summer I came home from church camp, and, I had talked to Martha, we'd been a couple days, and about 3 days after I returned home from church camp, I got the news that Martha had died by suicide. And no matter how many times I've told people when they've gone through similar things that they can't blame themselves. When it does happen, that's the first thing you do. I ask myself questions of, you know, what if I had talked to her earlier that day? Or what if I had done something different? It was a time where I became very angry at God. Martha was like me. She was also a PK. Her home away from home was Pilgrim Park camp, just like it was for me. And she was in my life at a time where I needed her the most. And then she was just gone. And um, it was one of the hardest things I had ever gone through in my life. Harder than my grandparents disowning me, harder than my struggles when I was in high school, and kind of took me, a long time to kind of deal with all of that. And I still talk to her often, and she's still an important part of my life, even though she's not here. And then the other one was summer of 2019, which all of you were aware that my dad had a nearly fatal accident, which was only topped the most difficult experience of my life from the previous summer. I was scared, I was hurting, I was not just angry, I was furious with God. And it was the most angry I ever recall being at God in my entire life. Um, and it really kind of just made me question, like, are you there? Are you still there? Why are these things happening? Even though I don't believe that God causes things to happen in our world, when those times in your life happen where, you know, things like losing someone or accidents, it sends me right back into that, why did you let this happen? Even though I know it wasn't God's doing. Um, but even in the midst of all of that, knowing that, we did get our miracle. My dad is here, he's walking, he's alive. But in the same hospital at the same time was a young family from my mom's church who lost their second baby. And so just holding those two things in tension of, why did my dad get his miracle and we got our miracle, but they didn't? And just, really made me kind of question things in some ways that I never had in my life before. But in the end of it all, where I wanted to kind of end today was why I'm here, why I'm at WCC, why I'm doing what I'm doing. And, youth ministry for me, as you can kind of tell from my story, I was involved in youth ministry and it was an important part of my life. And I had myriad people, too many to name, who nurtured me as a young person in the church, who empowered me as a leader, who, when I was struggling, they were there for me. When I was struggling coming out, the church was there for me. When I was discovering my gifts, they gave me a place to share them. And, I would not be in ministry if it weren't for the experiences I had. And all of these experiences, all of the things I've been through, they're the reason why, to me, youth ministry is not just a stepping stone to bigger and better ministry, but it is real ministry. It is important ministry. It is its own kind of ministry, and it matters. It's not just, a lesser form of ministry. And my calling in life is simply to help young people know that they are loved more than they can ever imagine, just as they are, that their lives matter, that they have some place where they can belong and even find a sense of home in the church, like I did, and that I want them to know that the church is not the church without their presence, their participation, their voices, and their gifts. And I truly do believe and mean when I say that I believe that youth are not just the church of the future, but they truly are the church of today. And my calling is to be a spiritual companion on the journey of life and faith with them.
Sarah, what a powerful, powerful story. We give God thanks for you and for your willingness to be so open and authentic with us, and to remind us that this whole God, Jesus, Bible, church, spirituality, theology thing is not just for other people, not just in our heads, but it can be experienced down deep in our very being and affect every aspect of our life. I thank you so much. We have 7 minutes or 8 minutes for some feedback. And if there's a lot of responses to Sarah's story, we may even extend it a little bit beyond that. Although if people need to jump off at 9:45, they're welcome to do so. So please raise your hand physically or use the chat or just unmute yourself and speak if you have a response for Sarah.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for sharing that. It was really quite moving. And I'm also an Elmhurst alum, but I went at night, so I didn't get all the fun of being on campus. I was working one at night. My question is that when you had these last 2 experiences that really sort of made you question, you know, with Martha and with your dad, how have you been able to, or what are you using in terms of your faith tactics or things to help get back to that centered place where you feel connected and sort of whole in your relationship with God?
I think a lot of it comes down to simply just reminding myself of all of the grounding and faith that I've had over the years, and the times where, you know, I have truly felt God's presence, and reminding me, you know, even just taking that moment to just stop and pause and just breathe and remind myself that the things I'm accusing God of or being angry of are not things I even believe in. But it's out of that grief and that, you know, frustration. And a lot of it really just took me regrounding myself in my beliefs and, you know, who I am and what my journey has taught me, and talking to people who can help remind me of those things as well.
Betty, I see your hand.
I just want to say, Sarah, how glad we are that you are with us and how much more it even means to us knowing your background. But you're a jewel in our midst.
Thank you, Betty.
Sarah, thank you so very much. It took me a while to be able even to speak after listening to what you had to say. I was very emotional with that. You've gone through a lot, and you've taught us a lot, and I thank you very much for that. I think it would be wonderful to know more about how you were able, as Jean asked, how you were able almost to forgive God and to say, yes, God, I know you're still there, even though these horrible things have happened.
You know, it takes a little bit of time sometimes to, you know, it's not necessarily a one and done kind of thing. Sometimes I still get angry or frustrated, but for me, one of the things that I didn't share is music has been an important part of my life. I mean, I talked a little bit about it growing up, but music still for me creates that, it creates a sacred connection unlike anything else. And there's been, you know, a number of songs throughout my life that have been kind of my go-to songs, that when I'm in that place, the words are just exactly what I need them to be. And I just close my eyes and I listen, and I reconnect with God through the sacred act of music, of singing, of listening to music, and you know, just reminding myself that God is more than that, that God has provided me far more blessings in my life than the things that have not been great in my life. And So sometimes it's more of a struggle than others, but I find my grounding in my reconnecting with God in a powerful way a lot through music. And when I'm in that place where I'm just questioning or doubting or not even sure God is still there, I have some of those kind of go-to songs that I listen to. And one of the songs that has been that for me recently has been by Audrey Assad, and it's called Drawn to You. So if you ever want to look it up, it's very powerful.
Sarah, I wanted to thank you for your very powerful and sensitive story. And I understand why you think working with young people is of paramount importance, that they're loved and accepted. But also, I see that you are a beacon to our parents in our church and all the people in our church of the importance of accepting their children and all the people in their families and all their friends who are of a different sexual persuasion. And I see that, in your family, how important it was that you were accepted by your parents and loved by them and given the opportunity to go to an LGBTQ group with your church. But I, as a parent, family member of people who are lesbians and gays, I wanted to tell you the importance of the family. I think is so important, is also equally important as working with young people.
Yes, indeed. It most certainly is. And, if my parents had reacted differently, or my parents reacted more like my grandparents, my life would have gone a very different direction.
What strikes me, Sarah, as you talk about this, and one of the reasons why I think, at least for me, I continue to have moments of struggle on my journey with things that I thought maybe I had resolved, but not really, is when we talk about the safe space. Eventually, in a sense, one of the goals is to embody it, is to be that safe space, not just for you, but for everybody else, through love and Christ's teachings for those of us that are in the church. And to see things in our midst that touch us very deeply and make us wonder if God is still there, that's a way for us to resolve those questions and hardships that we're having with God in that moment, to further embody and be that safe space in all that we do and all that we are. And so in a sense, that's the first thing I hit. When I come up against one of those walls, that's the first thing I remember, because ultimately that's what we want to be.
Yeah, safe space is both something we create, but it's also something that we are. And it's something that, and I know Jen Guy posted a question in the chat as well about what can we do as a congregation to create a safe space for all people. And, we do a lot of those things. Putting the rainbow flag out front is kind of that initial thing that says to someone, hey, like if they're willing to do that, then they're probably going to be, at least accepting of who I am. But we have to do more than just, put out signs and symbols. We actually have to be that safe space. We have to be a place where questions and doubts are embraced, where people are embraced, regardless of where they are in life or in faith or who they are or what their struggles may be, but giving them, a place and people to come to where their doubts are embraced, their questions are embraced, and their whole personhood is embraced. And a lot of churches, sometimes in the history of Christianity, have been more life-taking when it comes to, LGBTQ people, life shaming life-taking. And I believe fully, with every ounce of my being and soul, that we are called to do ministry that is life-affirming and life-saving. And that is, what, led me to ministry, that led me to do what I do and to be who I am, is to, we have to be willing to just talk to people and be with people wherever they are, however they are in that moment, because when I was struggling, I didn't need someone to just tell me, it's okay, you just need to get over it, it'll be fine one day. I needed someone to sit with me in that. I needed someone to be a safe place where I could be struggling, I could be not okay. And I think it's, a lot of it is, how we act, but it's what we say and it's how we treat one another. And we both become that safe space as individuals, but by sharing in life with one another, we help to create that kind of environment where everyone is embraced for who they are, including their questions and their doubts and their struggles.
Thank you again, Sarah, and all of you for being part of this. What a great gift this hour has been. And it's, again, brought us closer to one another and to the possibility that faith can be life-changing, life-saving, that as well as just full of joy and community.